Alrighty, so today we are going to talk about the Chicago Fire in the Moving Forward series episode. And what's kind of interesting is that in the last Moving Forward series episode, I kind of gone out of order because I want to combine a Moving Forward series of a certain team that made of a head coaching changes with Austin firing Josh Wu. And then in this video, it's kind of similar that I decided to do the Chicago Fire right now because they just made a big move in terms of hiring Gregg Berhalter as not only their head coach, but also as their sporting director as well. But I will also say that I'm not really kind of gone out of order because, I've mentioned before, so far I've been doing mostly Western Conference team, if not all of the teams I've done so far in the Moving Forward series has been Western Conference team. I want to start talking about some of the Eastern Conference team, and it just happened to be that the Chicago Fire is currently dead last in the standings and was the first team to be eliminated out of the Eastern Conference. But that being said, in terms of the record, 7-9-17 with 30 points. By the way, I'll definitely talk about the situation with Gregg Berhalter and how it feels like there's a bit of a mixed reaction when it comes to his hiring as the new head coach and the new sporting director of this Fire team. They currently are dead last in the Eastern Conference, but for a while, they were part of a big mesh for the race in the Eastern Conference. But to no one's surprise, they had their usual September collapse and have a bad run of form to pretty much play themselves out of playoff contention. They scored 40 goals and giving up 59 goals this season with a goal differential of minus 19. And looking at the last 5 seasons, yeah, it's been nothing but pain for the Chicago Fire. I mean, it's been kind of that way for the past decade or so. Last year, they finished 13th with a 10-10-14 record and finished with 40 points. The previous year, pretty much the same thing, finishing in 12th place with a 10-9-15 record and finished one fewer points. In 2021, they also finished in 12th place with a 9-7-18 record and with 34 points. 2020 in that COVID shortened season, that was probably the closest the Chicago Fire came to end their what is still now the longest active playoff drought out of any team with a 5-8-10 record with 23 points. And while that sounds ugly, they were only 1 point back of Inter Miami in terms of making the playoffs. And 2019 was also pretty close too. They finished eighth position. They just missed out on the playoffs. And if back in 2019, if all 19 was able to make it to the playoffs, the Fire would have snuck in that. But unfortunately, back then it was 17 making it to the playoffs, and they finished with eighth place with 10, 12, and 12 record, and finished with 42 points, 3 points behind the New England Revolution, who got the last spot heading into the playoffs in 2019. Now, looking at the top goal scorer of this team, and just like Austin, Chicago is a team that has had problem in terms of scoring this season. So unsurprising when you look at the top goal scorer, there's not a lot of players that has a lot of goal. But obviously their main number 9, Hugo Kuipers, currently have 10 goals so far, and it's kind of hard to judge in terms of Hugo Kuipers and whether or not this has been kind of a bit of a disappointing season, or the fact that it hasn't been as bad as it is. And I will kind of go with the latter, mainly because the Chicago Fire has just done a terrible job when it comes to signing DP. Like it feels like whenever they sign a DP, that it's gonna be bad, because that's just been kind of the track history of the Fire signing a designated player. And while they definitely took a big risk in signing type Purs, and that while I will say in the beginning he didn't produce, he's kind of similar to what we saw with Peter Musa with FC Dallas, where he kind of didn't produce in the beginning. Maybe it's just getting into a new league, getting into a new surrounding, but eventually he did get going. And that I do think that if this team does have a real playmaker, he could be a guy that could be a good goal scorer. And I think a part of the reason why he probably didn't get as much goal as he is because he just doesn't have the service, which again, that's going to be one thing I'll talk a lot about throughout this video. The reason why the Fire has really struggled on the attack again is that they don't really have a legitimate playmaker in this team, and that player was supposed to be Brian Gutierrez, but I think Gutierrez kind of had a down season with 6 goals to his name, followed by Marin Haile Selassie with 5 goals. Then you got Kellen Acosta with 3 goals, and Fabian Herberts to round up the top 5 with 3 goals. Top assist leader, I go with Marin Haile Selassie with 8 assists in terms of, or actually, he finished as the top assist leader of this team. Then you have Fabian Herberts with 5 assists, Kellen Acosta with 3 assists, Gaston Jimenez with 3 assists, and then Brian Gutierrez also with 3 assists. And again, it just feels like it's a lot fewer than what we saw in the previous season after he looked very promising last season as well. But the best game for the Fire this season, it has to be that 4-1 win that they had on the road against Toronto FC. And keep in mind, this was back when Toronto was still doing okay, and the fact that the Fire was able to march in there and put up a complete performance, probably one of the best performances I've seen the Chicago Fire has done on the road. Yeah, that was a really surprising result, but definitely the best win that they had this season. Now, the worst game of the season, I would have to say it's got to be that 4-0 loss to RSL early in the season, where they basically showed no fight in that game whatsoever. That was a game where it could have been even more if RSL would have been a little bit more clinical in that game. But yeah, that was arguably the worst game of the season. I mean, some will also say maybe it's the Inter Miami game as well. But honestly, we've seen before where any team can get blown out by Inter Miami. And while RSL back then was still a really good team, to just kind of the effort that we saw in this game compared to what we saw against Inter Miami, the effort was just clearly not there in that game against RSL compared to what we saw when the Fire take on Inter Miami later in the season, and unfortunately losing them at home 4-1 in that matchup. Now, in terms of average attendance, 21,473, which is good for 16 in the league. By the way, in terms of attendance this year, unsurprisingly, the league broke the record in terms of the most attendance in a single season. And again, that can happen when you have the Messi mania throughout the season, and overall the attendance definitely has gone off for a lot of these teams. And again, especially in the Eastern Conference too, because pretty much every single team gets the Messi boost there in terms of the attendance. The Fire, of course, gets that with the way that they had about 50,000 plus attending in the game between them and Inter Miami, and definitely inflated the number a little bit. Otherwise, for most Fire games, especially for those midweek games at Soldier Field, yeah, it kind of reminds you a little bit of those days at SeatGeek Stadium. And speaking of SeatGeek Stadium, Bridgefield, they did play a couple of games at SeatGeek Stadium, and those games were very sparsely attended as well, and that kind of drive down in terms of the attendance. But for weekend games when they aren't playing Messi, I would say that there are some Fire games that they draw pretty well. But again, for the most part, I'm not surprised that they're not drawing well. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Just because they made their return to Soldier Field closer to downtown and maybe more easier for the Fire fans to access to the game doesn't mean that the attendance will immediately just improve through dramatically compared to what we saw when they were playing in Bridgefield at SeatGeek Stadium. Because when you've been this bad for the past decade, it's no surprise that no one really wants to attend Fire games. It feels like it's more of a punishment to attend Fire games rather than actually enjoying it throughout this past decade. Now, in terms of MVP on this team, honestly, I can't really think of an MVP of this team. I mean, I was maybe thinking about giving to Hugo Kuipers because he was a top goal scorer, but even then, I mean, I think that yes, he had a good run of form this summer. He kind of cooled down a little bit, and that besides that, I can't really think of an MVP. So I knowing that I had to choose. I mean, I could have easily put not associated. I'm actually going to give some recognition to Maran Hali Selassie. I think he's a very underrated player, very underrated in the wing position. We saw it last season with him being the top goal scorer, and now this season he actually decided to be more of an assist maker, being the top assist leader of this team, and certainly a piece that again not a lot of people talk about how good he is in the wing right there. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Christian Espinoza, where a lot of people talk about Espinoza and how good he is on the wing spot, and part of that is because he's part of a very bad team right now, and that's kind of the same case with Haile Selassie. Now, in terms of disappointment of this team, I mean, you probably know who I'm going to pick as a disappointment. It's got to be Jordan Shaqiri. I mean, if I didn't pick Shaqiri as a disappointment, I might go with Brian Gutierrez, mainly because I was expecting so much better from him after kind of a breakout year that he had last season, and yeah, this season it didn't quite work out for him. I could also maybe pick Chris Brady as well. Last year Chris Brady was very good between the stake, making some save, and while he still at times shows that this season, yeah, he definitely had a bit of a down season as well. Speaking of both of those guys, in terms of young player to watch, those are really the two young players that I meant want to mention to watch. I mean, Brian Gutierrez, ever since he has played for the Fire coming out as a homegrown, he has done not only an amazing job, but has some national team kind of caliber level. And that again, this season it was kind of a bit of a down season for him, and especially with the way that this was a chance for him to finally shine. Now that he no longer have to worry about Shakiri being in that same position that he likes to be in that number 10 spot. Again, I thought he would really shine through, and we saw last season when Gutierrez was kind of the main playmaker, he really shined last season. But this year, it just kind of hasn't shown it, and we'll see whether or not that is the case. I do think that he's still a very electric player, and again, the same goes I would say about Chris Brady, just kind of a down season as well, especially 59 goals that they can see. That is among the most conceded so far in the East and in the league. Late that the Fire conceded this year. Now, looking at what went right for this team, so yeah, whenever I talk about the Chicago Fire, usually this is kind of almost a nitpicking in terms of what went right, especially when you talk about a team that's dead last. It's hard to talk about things that went right, but one of the things that went right is that they finally got rid of Shaqiri contract. I mean, that contract is going to go down as one of the worst, only in the past couple of seasons, but maybe one of the worst DP in MLS history. And what's kind of crazy is that I think the Fire for the last couple of years they easily had two of the worst DP in history. Remember the DP signing of Jairo Torres and how bad that signing was with him notching an exact total of 0 goals and 0 assists throughout the 2 years. And I even mentioned how he was probably the most disappointing player for this team in the prior year as well. Yeah, again, that Shaqiri contract. It is pretty clear that especially during the latter part of the season, Shaqiri almost feel like he just doesn't really care anymore, and I've even said it last season as well. This is a dilemma that the Fire has with Xherdan Shaqiri. When he's on, there's no doubt that Shaqiri, of course, will show that ability. I mean, you saw it during his time with Switzerland in the Euros. When he's on, he's still considered to be one of the best playmaker in the league. But unfortunately, for the most part, he's not been on with the Chicago Fire because he kind of just doesn't care and has that lazy ethics as well. And that, yeah, I mean, as I said, that is going to be going down as one of the worst contract that we've seen the team have signed. That $8.5 million contract that they of course have currently have. They're very happy that they finally got rid of that one, and it not only opens up a DP spot, but now you don't have that dilemma of, well, with how bad Shakiri has played, you would assume that you would bench him, but if you bench him, I mean, not only he's not going to be happy about that, but that's not a good look when you're trying to bench when you're a DP, and especially one of the most expensive player in the league being on the bench. It's again a bad look in terms of the front office and just the general signings that the Fire has made when it comes to their DP signings. Obviously, Greg Hitz finally stepping down as the sporting director. I'm pretty sure Fire fans are celebrating that too because they've been wanting Greg Hitz to be Fire, and even though he didn't get Fire, he did were able to announce that he is stepping down in his role. It's still the same thing. Again, that this is a guy that I thought when he came in with the Fire, he has a good track record before, but yeah, he just makes so many bad decisions throughout his time with the Fire, and just kind of almost like what we've seen in previous regime, just not really building the team that they want to be, and no doubt he has to go because of it. And then of course Hugo Kuipers, at times he looked promising this season. Again, it took a while for him to get going, but when he did get going, you can see the potential that he has, and I think he is going to be maybe a cornerstone of the pieces for this team in the future. Now, what went wrong for the Chicago Fire? I mean, it's pretty obvious what went wrong with this team. The narrative can continue, and I don't even need to talk a lot about this narrative about the Chicago Fire. It just feels like the cycle once again is the same thing as what we've seen for the past couple of years. They start the season slow, they get a good run in the summer. Look like they give Fire fans some hope that they can make the playoffs, and then when September comes, they completely collapse and basically they would be out of the playoff picture by the time when we get to decision day. And guess what happened this year? Yeah, it's very much the same, and this is why I've said many times before. I do feel for Fire fans. I mean, between them and the Quakes, probably two of the team that are the most snake bitten franchise. And I would say maybe the Fire is even more snake picking because at least the Quakes does make it to the playoffs. The Fire has not made it to the playoffs since 2017, and as I mentioned, they have the longest active playoff drought out of any team right now in MLS. The playmaking and goal scoring again was a problem. This season they don't really have that true playmaker in throughout the season, and that's why the goal scoring wasn't there. And then, of course, I do think that it was a down year for Chris Brady and the back line. The back line has been pretty solid for the Fire for the past couple of years, but this season they really kind of went downhill. And as I mentioned, Chris Brady he looked very good last year. One thing I will say that the Fire has done a really good job, at least in the last couple of years. They have done a great job when it comes to getting a decent goalkeeper and especially homegrown goalkeeper. I mean, Gaga Salina obviously was the previous goalkeeper for the Fire, and we know that he turned out to be an absolute stud. Eventually sold off for a huge amount of money, and then Chris Brady comes in, and again he has a huge shoe to fill. And last year he not only filled that shoe, but you could argue he was as good as Gaga Salina. Again, this season, kind of a bit of a sophomore slump, not as good as we saw last year, but still capable that he could be a decent goalkeeper for this Fire team. So yeah, that's another thing that kind of went wrong for this Fire team. So moving forward, obviously for this Fire team, the big news we saw yesterday was Gregg Berhalter officially announced the new head coach and the new sporting director of this team. Now, anytime when you have someone that are not only become a head coach but also getting that power in terms of making decision in terms of signing, I mean, it's a bit of a bold move. We have seen that when teams decide to do that, it kind of sometimes work out, and it sometimes doesn't work out very perfectly. But yeah, this should be interesting to see that now that Greg Berhalter is in the helm. What is he going to do in terms of making those signings? There's no doubt that one thing about the Chicago Fire compared to previous regime, this current regime is not afraid to spend money. They are going to splash out the money, and that Greg Berhalter is going to get the resources to sign some of these players. And I've heard rumors of the fact that Western McKennie might be one of those players that could come to the Fire. I mean, I don't know if he's a good fit. Again, that they need a playmaker in this team, mainly in the number 10 position, and McKennie doesn't really play in that spot. And not to mention, he hasn't really been that good in the last year or so with Juventus, and even with the U.S. men's national team, as what we saw a couple of years ago. And then, of course, the tactics of Greg Berhalter, and this is where the big talking point really is, where this is where there's really divisive opinions about whether or not if this of course will work out, because on one hand the negative response in terms of Greg Berhalter being the Fire head coach is looking at what he did with the U.S. men's national team and that negative style of play that that's not really going to really help out in terms of the Fire problem for the last couple of years, which is mostly on the attacking end. I mean, their defense maybe will get a little bit better, but it's not going to be entertaining soccer to watch. And unless if this team doesn't start to get winning, and you play that negative style of soccer, yeah, Fire fans are gonna really turn on Greg Berhalter and U.S. men's national team. Basically said, yeah, we told you that this of course wouldn't work out. But on the other hand, when you look at the positive side and the some of the crowd that said that this actually is a decent hire for the Fire is mainly the fact that, oh, I also just realized I gotta plug in my laptop because I just got a warning that it was low on battery. So let me just do that before my computer just shut down inexplicably when I do this video. But yeah, on the other hand, the negativity, or not the negativity, but the positivity in terms of this hiring is the fact that he's done a good job doing his time in MLS. You saw what he did with Columbus, really guiding that team to playoff appearance, despite the fact that they were on a shoestring budget, and not to mention with Anthony Precourt being the GM as well. I mean, yeah, it's not going so well for Austin when it comes to now Anthony Precourt being the GM of that team. But yeah, the way the fact that he's done well with Columbus, and at times, during his time with Columbus, they didn't really play that negative brand soccer that we saw with the U.S. men's national team. They do play some entertaining brand of soccer. It could be a case that this could actually work out for the Chicago Fire, and that this could maybe be something similar to what we see with Bruce Arena, where Bruce Arena obviously when before he went to New England, there was a lot of people were hating on him because of the failure of the men's national team to make it to the World Cup. But then as soon as he joined New England, he single-handedly turned that franchise around, so much so that they actually won the Supporters Shield and still currently owns the most point in a single season. And honestly, I'm not saying that the Fire is a team that is going to aim for Supporters Shield, but at the very least, they are looking to try and to make it to the playoffs and again end the longest playoff drought that we have seen any team to not make it to the playoffs in MLS. And then finally, again, they potentially open two DP spot. Obviously, they have one open right now because of the Shakira contract that they got rid of. But potentially they could get a second, as I heard they could buy down Gaston Jimenez contract or actually decide let him walk in as well. So there's a chance they have two DP spot open. There's no doubt they're gonna be using it to get a playmaker and maybe even getting a six or a defender as well. Again, the defense this season was not good whatsoever. So maybe you might be thinking about trying to spend some DP money on that department. I know usually it's kind of a cardinal sin to spend DP kind of money on a defender, and you hope that he, of course, worked out. But so far, when you look around the league, when we see teams decide to sign DP amount of money to get a number six or even get a defender, it actually has worked out more better than what I thought it was going to be. So yeah, there's no doubt that that's going to be the focus area. But otherwise, should be very interesting heading into to next season for this Fire team. I mean, as I said many times before, for the love of God, please tell me that next season is finally the year that the Chicago Fire will end this misery. And I'm not a Fire fan, but I can feel the pain that this franchise has gone, and I know obviously Fire fans don't want to say that with this new hiring, maybe they give some hope that things will turn around because so many times, the old saying and to phrase what Ted Lasso said, it's the hope that kills you in terms of this team, and that's been kind of the problem for the Fire really for the past decade or so. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button. As always, let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video. If you're a Fire fan, who do you think is the MVP, disappointment, and the young player to watch? What went right? What went wrong? And most importantly, moving forward, how is this team gonna look heading into next season? But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.